Hi everybody, my name is Eugene and I'm currently a teacher for animation and graphic design courses here at a local university in Malaysia. Now just a reminder once again that if you do want to try out this tutorial and need the Photoshop file for it, it is in a link in the description below. So do check that out if you want to kind of use the same materials. Now, what this video is about is rigging a character in After Effects. I'm not going to be teaching you in this video how to animate him in a run cycle, but what I'm going to teach you is just to rig a character. And the system that I'm going to be using is the Duik system, so it's a plug-in to After Effects. Just go to the website, which is in the link below, and install it. Now, the version I'm using is probably a few years old and it's a little archaic, but nonetheless, I think the principles are still the same, the functions are still the same, probably the placement of their buttons are probably in different places, but still not too, I think it's not too vastly different. Okay, you should still be able to find them. Okay, so now, before we start talking about rigging the character, I think it's important to show you how I actually prepare my character as well. So I painted this guy. The character that we're going to use today is some character I actually drew and created is Kato. So do meet Mr. Kato. He's Japanese inspired. I got kind of inspired by some of the costumes and fabric from Japan, and I placed them on some of the designs here. And even the mantle guard is inspired by Ashitaka from Princess Mononoke. So now, I painted him in Photoshop, but I actually did his line work on watercolor paper. So I usually like to work like that. I like to combine different mixed media. So he did start off on paper. And I like to draw my characters usually in a neutral stance first. I don't like to kind of segment them already and think about how I'm going to piece them together in After Effects. I usually just allow myself to draw them as neutral a pose as possible, where their arms and their legs are kind of apart so that it's easy for me to crop and clean afterwards. But I still draw the entire character as one piece first. So I've got this in Photoshop and then I colorized him. And then what I did is I cleaned off the background, I removed the background and you got him, and then I transferred him into a new file. And it is here where I started cleaning up the character. Okay, so now how do I start breaking the character into bits and pieces is, if you notice, the joints where each joint meet is slightly overlapping each other. So when you go and select the character, for example, let's just do one limb for instance. I'm going to go to the full illustration. So this one is the entire illustration, and let's try and do the arm. Okay, so when I select, I'm going to use the pen tool and I'm going to just select into. I'm not going to cut off straight at the wrist because if his wrist starts moving, you will find that there's a big gap that might appear. So I do go into the hand area a little bit so there is that overlapping. And as you go up into the elbow, do not cut a straight line right through like this. In fact, go up into the upper arm a little bit, grab a little bit of the elbow too if you want to, maybe here, and then complete it. So you go to path, create a path out of the pen tool you've made, go back to layers, copy and paste. All right, so now you have got a clean cut right now. Okay, now one more step that you need to do is, if you look at these two parts are the same, what I've done is I've kind of fuzzed up the edge. What I did was I used a eraser tool, slightly and gently cleaned up the edge, and then I used the blur tool to blur it up, so that when this joins to this and I start moving this part, it almost seems as if it's seamless, right? So it looks like this part is still slightly joined, okay? I mean, in comparison to something like this, if let's say this part was, this arm was on top of here, let's see, yeah, over here. Okay, so if I move this part, you'll notice that you can see very clearly that it's very um, sharp, the edge, and that may not be very nice. So you don't want that. You would want something a little softer. So how I do it is, like I said, use your eraser tool. Oops, sorry. And make sure I have the right layer selected. And then you go ahead and just eraser tool. Slightly just clean it up a little bit. And then use your blur tool and blur it out. Okay. Now, if you have an illustration that has line work, sometimes I would extend the line work a little bit more so that if he does move and parts of this is exposed, you might still see a little bit of line work. All right. So if let's say, oops, sorry, let's move the anchor point up and turn his elbow. So yeah, if something like this happens, if your line work continues on slightly, at least you will not have this gap. Just a little bit, all right? But some gaps are bound to happen, so this technique may not be absolutely perfect, but still you can get a pretty convincing moving character. So that's how I prep my entire character. So there's a lot of overlapping that happens. Just to show you, for example, the thigh area. You see, if I put the thigh over the hip right now, and the calf over this part, and if I change this to multiply, you can see that the thigh is overlapping the hip by quite a bit. It overlaps to the thigh overlaps the calf area quite a bit as well, the lower leg, right? So there is a lot of this overlapping that happens. Same thing with the neck. You see, I actually, I did not paint this back of the neck initially, but when I cropped his head out, I actually had to recreate the back of his neck so that if his head does turn, Control T, let's say he looks up, for example, somewhere here, parts of the neck can get revealed, right? So you do want that because that was not existing here before. Okay, same thing like, for example, with the sock. When I cropped his leg out, part of the shoe came with it, and I had to recreate the sock. So there is a little bit of touching up again that I need to do with the character when I was prepping the character. Okay, so with this, hopefully you can understand how my character is prepped up in order to animate him like this. All right, so now on with the rigging part. So let's go and start a new file or a new project. And let's import in my file. Look for the file. It is the kato setup.psd. So this file you can get in the description below. Composition retain layer sizes, of course. I hope that before doing this tutorial, you would have seen the one about importing files and why it is important to import it as composition retain layer sizes. All right, so now we have the same exact file. We can delete this off because this is the kind of static one which has no parts. It's just one layer, the full kato, so we can delete that. Now how large is this? I have got this frame that I've made, 19201080 frame. I usually, in all of my Photoshop files, I usually have this one layer that has this frame to remind me how large this thing is, so I can actually zoom into kato this large. He can of course go smaller, but if he increases in size any more than this, it might start to pixelate. So in my setup, I usually don't want this layer either, so that's all. I'm gonna delete this. I think that was an excess layer as well. Okay, so now let's start rigging him. Now before we rig him, the first thing we need to do is to make sure that we join all of his parts together. And the first thing to do is to move the anchor point for each body part. Okay, so the first one, we're going to start with the arms. All right, going to press Y, move the upper arm to somewhere near the shoulder, the lower arm to the elbow, somewhere here. And we're going to do the same thing for the hand. Okay, and the other side as well, shoulder, elbow, wrist. Okay, and for the thigh, we move it up to the hip area where you kind of know the joint of the hip is there. And then for the lower leg, gonna move it up to the knee. I could have blurred this one a little bit more actually. And for the shoe or the feet, usually I would anchor them at the ankle because that's where where your joints are, right? To rotate your feet around. Oh, don't forget the head. All right, so for the head, we need to head Y. Now we're going to place it somewhere behind the jaw because that's where your skull or your cranium is pivoted to. Then we go to the neck. So we go to the base of the neck. And for the torso, we go down somewhere to the waist. Okay, so let's put him together and assemble him before we parent him properly. Okay, so that's the skull. It's the neck seems a bit off, so let's center it a little bit. Shoulder. Now you'll notice that there is going to be some distortion that's going to happen. I usually in the animation process rectify it by using meshboard. But if you want a more complex animation, a more perfect animation, I think what I could have really done is drawn him without the shoulder mantle. I would have drawn the shoulder mantle as a separate piece and added it on to his body. So he would there would be a version of his torso and his arm without the mantle. It would just be bare skin. Okay, all right. So let's put this here and here and here. I think I should settle the legs first because it's going to be covered. Okay, so his hand should be here, his leg somewhere here, and then his knee, or rather his calf, and then his shoe, and then we do this arm, which is the last bit. Okay, all right, so now we've got him assembled. The next thing we need to do is, of course, to parent all of the body parts. And as I parent the parts together, what I would usually do is also to give it a good test. All right, now how do I test it? Let's do the left arm first. So the hand is, of course, parented to the lower arm and the lower arm to the upper arm. Now, if you notice my files, every single layer in my Photoshop file is very neatly named. According to the system that I understand, whenever I have L up arm, it means the left upper arm. LW arm means left lower arm. So this is very crucial, especially if you have a project with a lot of different characters. You definitely want to do this, and his name is in front of all the layers. Okay, so now you've done that. I think I should push his shoulder slightly up. Okay. So how do I test it? I select all three of the parts of the arm. I press R, and I'm going to just rotate the arm slightly just to check it. There's definitely going to be stuff like that, which I mentioned before, I'm going to usually fix with meshboard in the later animation stage. Okay, all right. So it seems all right. It doesn't have too awkward bend. It seems okay. So let's do the other arm and the legs as well. So for the legs, I'm gonna have shoe parented to the left shoe to the left calf to the left thigh. Where is that? There. Okay, so that's done. The head should of course be parented to the neck, and the neck to the torso to the hip. And eventually your what you call your thigh, which has no parent right now, should be parented to the hip, and your arm, upper arm, should be parented to the torso. Okay, so you're kind of linking all the different parts around. I'm going to speed this video up because all there is left to do is the right arm and the right leg. Okay. Okay, as you can see, there was a little bit of an error as I'm testing, so I need to figure that out. I think what I've done is I've kind of linked certain things wrong. So the left shoe is linked to the left calf, linked to the left thigh. That should be correct. I think there's something wrong with the right one. So I've got my right shoe linked to my right calf. Actually, I've named this badly. It's not supposed to be L calf. It's supposed to be R calf. So you see there is an issue. There is 2L calf. So it is very important to name your layers. This is evidence of it when I made an error. But and then it should be linked to the R tie. Alright, so let's just see what might be the issue here. Oh, it's okay. It's actually working fine. Okay, so this is fine. And this is fine. And this is fine as well. Okay, so they're actually all working fine. Now, the next step is to use the Duik system and to link it all together. Okay, so this is where we go to where can we find the Duik system is in your window. Go to Duik. It's down here. Alright, so I'm going to start that up. And usually it says launch Duik. Okay, alright, so now what do we do first? Okay, so let's just delete this background. It's getting a bit annoying. I'm going to select the hand. All right, usually you select the end of the appendage, like the hand or the shoe, or in the case of his torso, the end of it is actually the head, neck, torso. So you select them best in pairs, in sets of 3. So I've got hand, lower arm, upper arm. Okay, so you select the hand and you click on this controller, and then you can select whether if you want the size big or small. I think relatively small is fine. The color of your controller, you can choose whether it's red or green, just in case you have too many controllers. So you're making like a multi-headed hydra or something like that, then you want a lot of different colors. But for a human being with standard parts, I usually use the same color. So cyan, and I press create. And this is how a controller looks like. All right, right now you can't use it yet because what you need to do is the next thing is to select his controller, and the next thing you need to select is also his hand, lower arm, and upper arm. So the whole set. All right, you need to select all of them and the controller. Go to IK, to layer IK goal, and press create. All right, now if you want to test it out, it can work. So just by moving the controller, you can actually move the arm already. All I'm moving is the controller right now. So if you want to animate the character, you actually press P on the controller and keyframe the position of this controller. You can go for R as well, and you can rotate the hand too. Okay, so now another thing to note is now if I pull the controller really far, oh, his hands are coming off, and you don't want that to happen. What you need to do is go to the settings. I just press F3 and the settings for this controller will come up. I would take on uncheck auto stretch. So no matter how far your controller goes, your hand will not go wonky. Unless you want to, it's like a cyborg of its Street Fighter Dalsim where his entire arm actually disconnects, then fine. But Mr. Kato doesn't have parts like that, so you don't want him to overstretch. Now, say for instance, when you're testing and you realize his arm is going this way, what you do is you have to go back here and check that it's clockwise or anti-clockwise. So sometimes it's the other way around. Okay. Now, I've noticed that when he bends his arm, there is a little bit too much exposed here. By right, I could have undo everything that I've done with the controller and reposition the anchor point, but sometimes I get a little bit lazy. If it's not too major, I would just move the anchor point right now and you can still kind of rescue it a bit, right? Because I find that the change is just very little. Oh, it's a bit too much. Okay, all right, there. So it's very minor, so it's still okay. All right, let's move the hand. Okay, so yeah, it's a lot better. I would actually fix this with a mesh warp later on. Okay, so the process is gonna be pretty much the same. Let's just do it one more time with the leg, and then I'll speed up the video. So I'm gonna press on controller, create a controller for the leg. If you find that you're gonna confuse the leg with the hands, go ahead and choose a different color, probably green. Press OK, so your controller is green. And then, if sometimes your controller appears huge, like sometimes they create a controller this large and it's going to be so in your face and you want to make it smaller, do make it smaller first, then press the IK. All right, so you're going to select shoe and make sure you select the left shoe, the left cuff, and I'm holding down my control key as I'm selecting, yeah? And also, where is the left thigh? Okay, the left thigh. All right, so these three parts chosen, and the controller, press on IK to layer IK goal create. Okay, let's test out the leg. Yay! Okay, so it's moving fine. That's great. Okay, so I'm going to speed up the video now because the process is pretty repetitive for the other two limbs and the head as well. In fact, let's just do the head before we actually do the final two. So I'm going to select the head, make that the controller out of it. So that's the head's controller. I'm going to select head, neck, and torso. And I'm going to hit, is the controller? Yeah, so 4 things must be selected before you hit IK, press create, and done. All right, I'm not going to test that out because I've not rigged the other hand and leg yet. So, okay, now I'm going to speed up the video. Okay, so I have basically rigged the limbs and the torso. Now, what we need to do next is, there are still some more steps to do. What we need to do is create a controller for the hip, okay? Because the hip, as you notice, is not parented to anything. We need to put a controller there. This is a special controller because we don't need to select all the 3 parts. Maybe let's create a different color for the hips controller. So let's create another controller and make it the red controller. And press OK. Now, what we're going to do with this controller that we've made with the hip is we are going to parent the hip to the controller, the hips controller. Okay, so wherever the hip goes, the controller goes. Okay, wherever the controller goes, the hip goes. Okay, now the other thing that we need to parent to is these two guys, both the hands, the controller for the hands, the left hand and the right hand. They need to be parented to the torso, not the torso controller. We have not made one for that, but the torso image itself. Okay, so once you've done that, okay, you notice that when you move the head controller, both the hands move together. Okay, so that's great. All right, and what we need to do next is, let's check this out. Okay, now the head controller, you notice that the head controller, now that needs to be parented to the hip, because wherever your hip goes, your whole torso or your head needs to go, correct? So that is that. Okay, so let's test it out. Okay, great. So he's doing some squats. All right, now just some last bits. Okay, now you've got the shoe, which has no parent yet, or the hip. What I usually like to create is I will take the hips controller, duplicate that, and bring it all the way down between his feet. All right, and I'm going to call this the master. So this master controller will control everything. So every part that is left, which is his shoe and his hip, shall be parented to the master. Okay, all right. Oh, this leg is still stretching. So auto stretch that. And let's try again with his hip. Ah, great. So he can jump and stuff. So basically, everything here has a parent. All right, everything here has a parent except for the master controller. Okay, so I'm going to screenshot this little thing here and put it in the Photoshop file so that you can use it as a reference to know which parent goes to which. Okay, and don't worry, I will try and correct the R calf thing that I made an error of that just now. Okay, so we're done rigging the character. So this character can now be used for a simple animation. Okay, so now you can move and test him around. Oh, look, he can still stretch his neck. So probably we have to uncheck auto stretch and he shall not be moving wildly anymore. Okay, so this is a very simple rig for a character. Now, another tip is I usually like to, once I rig the character, of course, I would just crop him up just to keep this composition quite neat. Composition, crop comp to region of interest. And I'm going to call this composition Kato rig ready or something like that. Just main rig. All right. I'm not going to animate this. This will always remain untouched. Anytime I want to animate him, say in a scene, I would actually duplicate this rig, okay, and then call this, for example, Kato scene 01, and then make the setting to the frame 19201080. Sorry. Press OK, and then I'm going to animate this. So scale him down to whatever size you want with the master controller, because like I said, the master controller controls everything here, and you can start animating him. All right. Now Duik is great because all you need is actually the controllers. Do you still need all of this? Well, not really anymore. So what I usually like to do is I select all of the Photoshop layers because it gets messy when you start animating it. I switch on the shy tool. So I'm this little guy here with the nose. If you check this out, this little, no, it looks weird, but it's actually a guy with his nose trying to look shy over a wall. So what you do is you click him and he kind of goes behind the wall, right? So once you've done that, and you have to go up here, so there's a larger version of him here. See? Hides all layers, so he's shy, right? So you click on that. All of the layers have gone. Did you delete them? No, they are still there. If you want to see them again, you just switch it back on and they'll come back up. So this keeps your timeline workspace a lot more cleaner, a lot neater, and not so cluttered. So all you have to deal with is the controllers right now, because all you're doing is animating it. Okay, so this concludes our rigging tutorial. I hope you find this useful. For more videos on motion graphics with Adobe After Effects or illustration methods using Photoshop and Illustrator, please click on the subscribe button. If you found this tutorial useful, please give it a like. Also, do follow me on Instagram at eugenosaurus.fu. Most of my artwork is there. I also have a Facebook page by the same name. Both links are in the description below. I'll see you guys again soon.